3 in the spring trimester of 2017. I'm Jennifer Marie and this is my Atelier diary. A reminder of a summer workshop that's happening at my Atelier in Chicago. My instructor Magda is teaching and I'll be assisting it. The workshop is broken into 2 parts and you can take either one part or both. So there's a drawing workshop for 2 weeks and then a painting workshop for 4 weeks. I have all the information down in the description box below along with my email if you have any questions about it. And if you sign up through me, you get 15% off the class. My figure painting and also my cast painting this week have gone both really well. I feel like I've made a lot of positive strides and things are starting to click and come together more with painting, so it's been a really good week. Monday, I worked on the transitions from the shadows into the lights on the figure painting, and I started down in the legs and worked my way up. So mostly spent most of my time in the legs and I got a bit in the torso. So for the legs, it was a pretty jumpy transition between the shadows to the lights, so I was really working on the transitions to get that to be a lot more gradual as I see in nature. And what I'm doing is I've got my shadow color and then my darker halftone, or darkest halftone, which is generally this dark greenish color, and then I'm finding, gradually getting lighter, there's this blue color that kind of morphs then into this more purpley color, and then more into the lighter skin tones, which in the legs it's this grayed down ochre color, and then it gets a little warmer as it moves up the figure. But I'm trying to keep things simple and making sure that I turn my head to the side like this and look at the figure, and when I'm trying to judge color as well, I'm trying to force myself to not look into the color that I'm trying to mix up but off to the side slightly, so out of the corner of my eye I'm more judging the color than looking right at it, and that's definitely helping me more. I just have to keep reminding myself to keep doing that. Tuesday, I pretty much did the same thing, which I'm finding those transitions between the shadows and the dark halftones and midtones, and then the lights. This time I spent most of the time then going in the torso and a little bit in the chest as well, since I didn't have that much time yesterday working on that. And in the stomach, in the light area, I'm trying to show the big planes that make up the stomach. So I want to be careful that the planes are represented and it's not just, as the stomach curves from light and goes into shadow, that it's not just generally fading into darker tones as it's going into the shadow. So it's not just kind of randomly blurry as it gets darker as it starts turning down, but I'm trying to specifically show the planes of Brian's specific anatomy. So also trying to get the balance between getting away from more general shapes into more specific, but not also thinking of specific and just focusing in on details, but still trying to, in the areas that I'm working, like the whole torso, trying to see all of the planes that make it up, so I'm not thinking too small, but also not thinking too generalized as well. Wednesday was a nice cloudy day, so all of Brian's skin tones were looking a lot warmer and a lot more colorful. Up to this point, I had been really pushing the cools and the grays in Brian, so what was lacking and what made it really obvious on that warm cloudy day was the warms in Brian's skin. So I've seen in areas where I could push the warms a bit more, push the colors a bit more, and then also working on keying Brian, so trying to get the value as light and as colorful as it needs to be in the brightest area, which is Brian's chest, and then also that arm that's raised. Thursday, I spent the whole day working in the shadows, working to try and unify all the shadow shapes. Even though, this is something Matt's always pushing me to do, is even though that the shadows are separated and they might not all seem like there's different pieces of them and they might not all be connected, but you want them to look like the shadow shape is all one animal, and where it is disconnected in areas like, for example, like maybe the shadow under the stomach and looking at the shadow on his raised arm, you want to think of those, like the whole shadow shape as one animal, like the shadow from the stomach goes behind his back and then comes out from behind his arm, and that's where you see it in view. So trying to make it all look, even though they are separate on the figure, to make them all look connected, and like you're looking at it all from one moment. But you also don't want the shadow to look dead, like there's no color variations in it either, because there are a lot of colors in the shadow. So it's a balance between unified but still showing as much variation as it has in life, but with the goal also to be that you want the most interest to be in the light, because in the situation you want the focal point is in the light, and so you don't want the shadow to be so distracting that the viewer then will be caught up looking at the shadow or in the shadow rather than the focal point, which is the light, where you want to keep the eye. So what I did to unify the shadow is I started in the darkest part, and I used pure ivory black so I could really see my key that I'm working with. So behind the ear on his head, that's where it looks like the darkest to me, so that was where I was putting the ivory black. And then so I mixed up a dark shadow tone, which the colors that I'm using, so I have black, cadmium red light, yellow ochre, and flake white. And so you're going to use all those colors except for flake white. So the shadows are all going to have some variation of the black, the red, and the yellow. So I kind of then have my base shadow color that I mix up, and as I'm working, I'll put that down first, and then I might dip my brush into the red and kind of dab that into my mixture of the dark shadow color, and then I'll apply that on the canvas, and just to be able to show all the different color variations with still trying to keep it unified. And a problem that I was having was both of Brian's arms, the shadows in the arms are really red, and they look really red compared to everything else. And so I painted that dark shadow in the arms, and then I put red in the arms and kind of mixed that in. But then they definitely stood out from the figure, and they didn't look so unified with it. So I asked Matt how he deals with that, knowing that the arms are really red, but then making them look so red they looked weird in my painting. So Matt took me to the painting that he was working on and was showing me that even in areas where the shadows do look really red, you need to find the greens and the yellows in them as well, because those are still in there. So he was showing me that I definitely could see that a spot looked more red, but then I could see where he had brushed in some of the yellowy, greener tones in the shadow as well, which just balanced it out more, so it kept the shadows looking unified. So I went back to my painting and did the same thing. I was just making sure that I was finding both of those colors, the reds and the yellows / greens, but just like adding more red if it needed to look more red or something like that. Friday, I looked at my painting, and I'm liking the transitions from the shadows into the darkest halftones, and then I'm also liking the look of the lights into the midtones, but the area that's looking like it's moving too fast or too jumpy transition-wise is the darker halftones that are then moving into the lights or the midtones. So that's where I worked on, and I first started, the area that looked like it was farthest away from nature was the torso, the side that's on the left with the shadow going into the lights. And so I started working in that area, and then I started moving down too, so the shadow that's under the stomach, and then also the pubic region, and then the dark colors from the hip that's on the standing leg, and kind of going down that a little bit. And working on that, and then I started also working more into the lights in the stomach and going up into the chest more, and I'm really liking what I'm getting a lot with it, because I feel like when I will mix up colors for the day, my palette will generally lean towards, I'll either be using only warms or only cools, even though I'm trying to do both, but I feel like now I'm more successfully balancing out the warms and cools and working those at the same time. So Brian's skin tones are having more of a nice balance and looking a little bit more realistic than leaning one way, being either too yellow or being too blue or something like that. Magda also mentioned that I needed to work on keying up the lightest part, so the chest, and she said also work on that raised arm. And what I had before, because you do see variations in tone as the muscles coming from the chest into the arm, there's these transitions where you can see muscles overlapping as it goes up the arm. And she was saying that it's fine to have that there because you do see that, but to first concentrate and making sure that the light is the most powerful part of the painting, because especially in this pose with Brian having his arm up, it's really, when you are looking at him in nature, it's really striking how bright the arm is and the chest, and then it gradually moves down where his stomach and his hips then are a step down in the light, and then the legs are another step down. And so she said to make sure you have that stair step effect that of light as it moves down his body, that I can't be dividing the light up too much, especially in the brightest point of him, to make sure that the painting stays as dynamic as it does with having the same light effect. And so I did that, and I feel like now the painting is blocked in pretty well, where I can see where I need to go with things. I still have 2 more weeks, so I feel like I have still a ton of time to work on this painting, which is great. I think having painted my last figure painting, Kevin, for I don't remember how much time I had, maybe 3 weeks or so on him, that I'm painting faster. So that's great because then I can work on resolving the painting and have more time with that. Also, I think working on this really big cast painting of mine that's really complex with different figures is really teaching me how to be able to move around the figure. Because I remember with doing these figure paintings, I would work in an area and it would be hard for me to, you know, have paint mixtures and be painting one area, but then be able to put paint mixtures down on a part of the figure that I wasn't working on that was farther away than what I had already mixed my paint mixtures up for. But for this, I feel like I'm able to move around the whole figure a lot easier than I have in the past, which is great because I feel like then going from day to day, capturing the different effects of light and color that I am seeing depending on what the sky is doing, I'm really able to chase those effects and affect the whole painting at once. And then for my cast painting, I feel like I've made a lot of positive progress with my cast painting. So last week, Magda talked to me about trying to resolve as best I can the focal point. And so the focal point is that main focal baby head, is what I've been calling it, the main focal baby head. And then working areas around it as well. So getting the focal baby head as resolved as I can, where I want it to be, so then I can judge everything else off of that to get the level of finish that I want, because Magda's really pushing me not to have every part of the painting be super highly resolved, but rather pick the parts that I want to resolve it, keep areas a little more simplified and mysterious in them, or not distracting with detail and over contrast, so you can better lead the eye around the painting and not just like have the eye feel like it can go everywhere in the painting, but have a little bit more direction. So I was working on that head and kind of feeling crazy at the same time because I want to resolve it, but I wasn't liking how the painting of the hair was turning out. The hair specifically, because there's a lot of details in there, a lot of curls with the hair, and how to paint that in a beautiful way. And so what I was doing, I was following each curl as it went around and kind of following it in a linear way and following how the drawing of the curl would go around. And the effect then, after painting it like that, the hair was starting to look kind of noodly, or almost like the texture of a brain or something like that. And I just wasn't liking how that was looking. And I was looking in old painting books of master paintings and trying to see how they do it, because they always have a really graceful way of showing detail with making it, I don't know how to describe it. It's like showing detail really well, but making it also look effortless and really beautiful how light falls across it rather than something that is maybe more I don't know. I guess I don't know how to describe it. It's just like the way that I don't like is when it starts looking too linear and stringy and looking like you're um, putting in details to put in details rather than showing just how light is hitting form, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyways, so I was talking to Matt about that and saying, probably not articulating it very well because I feel like I can't articulate it very well right now, but just saying how I don't like how the painting's looking in that area, but I don't know what to do to make it look better. So he was talking with me on how I could fix it up. And he was saying, he took the example of these curls or strands of hair that are, so it's on the right side of the main focal baby head, right above the shadow that's on the face. And so he took that chunk and was saying that it looks like what you're missing is the plane, and looking at the plane, the whole plane of the hair, it's not the individual ones. And he was saying that it looks like in my hairs, there's like a grouping of 3 of them, and he said it was looking like I had, shown the highlight on each of the strands of the hair as it went down and like divided the shadows up. And he said, yeah, like he said he could see what I was looking at, but then to switch my way of thinking, think of it as a plane, think of how the light is falling across the plane, and think about painting the light as it's falling across the plane, and to not paint with the forms in a linear way like you're following the drawing, but instead to paint across the forms. So if my fingers are the 3 curls, how I was painting them is all my brush strokes were going this way, really following the lines of the hair. And he was saying instead of painting with the form, paint across the form, so have the brush strokes going down like that. And so what I did was, he left and I tried it out, and so I was also using a bit more medium as well, so the paint was a little more fluid than what I typically paint with, I think. And so I went in there and I started to paint the light across the form going down, and then just worked on the halftones to kind of blend it out where it needed to be. And I honestly wasn't thinking so much about the drawing of the hairs either. I would go up to my painting, I would start seeing the light effect, and I would get my color, paint it down, and then I would step back to my spot and look at it and see what I needed to do to get the impression to look more accurate, run up to my painting, put the right paint down, and then step back and keep going back and forth like that until I got what I wanted. And I made a really beautiful light effect, but the problem was that I lost the structure then of the drawing. So what I did was I took a mahl stick and I took a tiny paintbrush, got into my shadow color, and I corrected the shadow lines that are all around the hairs and got those really precise. And so when I did that, it then had proper structure, but also had this really beautiful light effect. And that was it. That's what I was looking for. And so what I was missing was having this mass of light, the impression of the mass of light, which looked like it's painted very quickly, which it was. But then I go back really carefully in for the shadow shape and clean the shadow shape up. So then I have this really nice blend of a nice careful shadow shape that shows the structure and a nice impression of light that can be painted a little bit more, I don't want to say effortlessly, because it took a lot of, I don't think I'm there yet for it to be effortless, but I think it does have that more appearance, kind of like it just happened rather than super labored over, like if I was going through each curl like what I was doing before. And also painting it that way too, just how the paint was on it in the light area of the clump of hair there was so interesting, like this marbly effect to it, or something where it was kind of, I couldn't really tell which paint I put on top of other paints. Like it just morphed into this really beautiful texture that I don't necessarily know how to describe, but I know that I like when I see that stuff in other paintings. So I was really happy, really, really happy with how that went. And so for the rest of the head, I worked on it that way and worked on other areas around it. And I'm liking the painting so much better, and I feel really good about leaving that baby head alone now and to start working on areas around it to resolve everything else so I can finally finish this painting up. All right, and then extras for this week. Monday, we now have a portrait class, which is 3 hours with the model, which is really, really good. I haven't done a lot of portraits. I've done one, I guess, so it's good to get more practice this way. Also, which I think is really great, is that we are not doing sight size for it. We do sight size for everything at the Ravenswood Atelier, but for the portrait, we are working from doing comparative measuring, which I think is good, so I can practice that, because I really like using sight size, but I don't think it's practical to use it for everything. So I think it's smart to learn both so you can use both whenever you need to. So I did this with charcoal on Canson paper, and I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out for my first one, doing a portrait from just doing comparative measuring, and I want to do a lot more so I can get more practice with it. And lastly, in my free time, what I've been doing is working from this book that I got from the art museum here, which has all of Rembrandt's etchings in it, and it's really cool because they also have they're printed in the original size of the etchings, and there is a pocket in the back where they have etchings that were bigger than the book, so you unfold this piece of paper, and it's really, really cool. And so I was thinking that Rembrandt's my favorite, and his paintings are, if I could paint like Rembrandt, that would be just the dream, right? So I figure with his etchings, with how he's making his marks, that if I study his etchings, maybe that will kind of show me how he maybe lays down paint strokes with how he's following the forms of his line makings in his etchings. So that's one reason. Also, I want to study them to see how he captures emotion in faces, because that's something else that Rembrandt does better than anyone, in my opinion, is capturing the really the soul of the person, or whatever you believe. So what I've been doing is cutting out pieces of paper the exact size of the etchings in the book and just working from them in pen. So these are examples that I've done, and this is really fun and really relaxing. I haven't really worked with pen before so much, and I think because working with pen is it's pretty intimidating because it's not a forgiving thing like paint, charcoal, or pencil. Once you put the mark down, you can't take it up again. But doing this and just doing it carefully, and it's actually really relaxing because I know that I can't be fussing with the drawing too much. Well, I can't fuss with it at all because I can't erase it and keep moving lines around. So I'm just putting lines down and just trying to get it to be as close to what I'm seeing as possible. And then so, like this one, some don't turn out so well then, but what I do then is after I'll get a couple of them done, I'll put them up next to Rembrandt's etching, and I'll see what I'm doing well and then what's kind of off. And when I like to copy things, I like to get it as accurate as possible, so I'll just keep erasing and fussing around till I get it to look right. But doing it like this, I think, is really good because I see my first initial instinct, I guess, with getting things down. And then, for example, too, for Rembrandt's eyes, I'm noticing that a lot of the emotion, which I'm making the dark part of the round part of the eye pretty circular on the bottom, and it seems like with all of these, it kind of dictates dictates the emotion with the, instead of having a round part, but the angle that's going into the circle of the eye on the bottom. And also other things that I've noticed, like for his crazy hair and things like that, is that I'm making them pretty circular as it goes around and pretty even. But then when I hold it up to Rembrandt's, when I finish with it, I see that there's a lot more character where the hair is not just going, whoop, the hair's not going just in a circle, but there'll be a slight more interesting gesture to it. Like it'll be kind of circular, but it might like point up here and point down here a little bit more. So I don't know. This has just been a fun little thing, and I think I'm learning bits from it. But then, and it's also nice to get drawing practice in, and then also nice to be looking at Rembrandts all the time. And I also have a surprise to share. I was going to shoot it for this at the end of this video, but something's being shipped to me and it got delayed in shipping, so I'll talk about it next week.